So I don't know if you could tell on account of my Shinoa profile picture and plethora of Shinoa images used in my videos, but I am quite fond and familiar with the Seraph of the End franchise. It was one of the first anime that I had watched and I enjoyed myself quite a bit with it. I liked the characters, the story was promising although very basic, and the power system was quite an interesting one too. And overall, everything about it just had so much potential if given the right development. I finished season 2 a long time ago and lo and behold that was all there was for the anime despite leaving off on a pretty big cliffhanger. So eventually I brought myself to reread the stuff that happened in the anime and catch up to the manga despite hearing very mixed opinions about it both around the internet and from my own friends who had been reading the series. I of course became very intrigued by these opinions and decided to pick up the manga for myself and finally catch up on it. And well, it's definitely an interesting case, I can tell you that much. This video is going to be mostly negative, like very negative, actually extremely negative in all honesty, so if you love everything there is about this series, I would recommend you get your hate comment off early and exit out the video. I have a lot of complaints to get off, and this is all being told from someone who loved the series and who really liked the anime. It takes true appreciation for a story to be able to point out all the things you have a problem with, and that's what I'm here to do today, so if you don't like that, then this isn't the place for you. So I had already made a video talking about the complicated fate of the anime, so check that out if you haven't, but to sum it all up, the main reason why season 3 hadn't happened was because there wasn't a lot of manga chapters left to adapt, leaving it in a state of limbo. But now, there's like 80 chapters to adapt, so there's enough content for like 3 more seasons if they really wanted to. So yeah, not really looking good for the anime, which is a shame because from where I picked it up, the arc right after where the anime leaves off was, in all honesty, my favorite arc in the entire series. I liked it quite a bit. It actually gave me hope that maybe everyone else just misunderstood how well it was being handled, but we're gonna get to that later. The next arc takes place literally right after where season 2 ended. Oh yeah, quick warning, this video contains a lot of manga spoilers, so beware for that. Okay, so anyways, it takes place right after season 2. Yu is having lots of trouble with keeping his demon under control, Mika is having trouble learning to trust the rest of the Shinoa squad, Guren's goals are becoming far more suspicious, and worst of all, Ferret and Crowley are on our group's tail. They end up making a bit of an alliance because of the fact that Ferret knows what Guren's after, and they have a way to both help Yu control his demon and a possible way to bring their childhood friends back to life, which is basically the goal that is expanded upon and built up towards for the rest of the series. Basically the entire goal of the story now is to bring literally everybody back to life, everyone that has died. And this arc went pretty strong, this first little arc. We got to see a lot more of Ferret and uncover what his true goals and allegiance may be. Crowley starts off as a very promising character who starts to slip down the drape on his past humanity, and we actually see our main cast go through some real growth, as well as Guren, who despite his trustworthiness being up in the air, is still a very likable character with a very interesting arc. Then the series goes on past this arc, and let's just talk about some things. First, let's talk about some positives because there is always room for some good stuff in something that has a lot of issues. Asuramaru and Cruel are two really good characters, I think, for the most part. The vampires are handled pretty well in the series, and by that I mean the ones we've known from the beginning. Shinya is also a very intriguing character as well, despite not getting a lot of screen time, and the series still has the advantage over everything else with it being the only anime in existence with Shinoa Huragi in it. So that's like 100 points alone for this manga. The artwork, designs, and fights are very well drawn out too. Paneling for the most part is pretty solid. As a monthly manga, it's to be expected, but it's still well worth the compliment. The first few arcs following the anime's ending were very good for the most part. From when we first ally with Ferret to when we have to save him and Cruel, then to when we see Shinoa go berserk of all people, the series up until I'd say chapter 90 to 100 goes very strong, and despite being inconsistent is still a pretty solid story. But then we reach that chapter 100 mark all the way to 120, and well, there's a lot of issues to be addressed. There's a notable dip in quality in terms of writing as it goes on, and that isn't to say it was perfect beforehand, as it was really just kind of solid, but it gets worse and worse and worse as it goes on. I think the moment the story truly started going down a very bad hill, and this is a massive spoiler, so please click off if you don't want to hear it, is when Mika dies for the second time. The moment he died isn't when it gets worse, but it's what follows right after it. There isn't a lot of time to be emotionally invested or affected by his death at all, because pretty much as soon as we see Mika die, we're immediately told that he can be brought back to life. And then he's brought back as a demon the very next arc as Cursed Gear for You, which also completely sidelines Asuramaru and kind of removes him from the whole story, which just sucks in my opinion. Like, that really sucks. Mika was a pretty good character before his quote-unquote death, but him as a demon just, I don't know, it doesn't really work for me. First of all, the design is kind of hilarious, like really hilarious, and the whole arc about turning him into Cursed Gear was just not that interesting to me. The pacing was really all over the place, and I didn't really care at all to see Mika come back because it just wasn't written that well. I hadn't even taken in the fact that he had died earlier, and to see that he can just be brought back to life right after kind of just left me bored, if that's the right word to say. I felt nothing reading the entire arc, and I didn't want to see Asuramaru potentially have his role taken away at a time where Cruel finally showed up with our main characters. It also really confused me to see how the main cast treats their demons in this arc. Yes, they're on the opposing side, but not only do they not listen to their reasoning at all for really no reason at all, which kind of contradicts how they've acted in the past since they've listened to fucking Ferret and Guren both talk about their evil ass deeds. They completely disregard the characters that gave them all their strength in the series, and in some cases actually grew to trust and like them. In general, I don't think the demons were handled well at all, in this arc or even in this manga in general. The only one that's really handled well or treated like an actual character is Asuramaru. Pacing is a general issue that comes up when talking about monthly manga as well. Now, for the most part, I didn't really see that since I was binging it, but once Shikama Doji got introduced and all of these flashbacks involving you and Mika began coming up literally every 2 or 3 chapters, I began to understand the complaint a bit more. Like, Shikama Doji had been faced like 3 different times, and when we see him at his strongest, he's defeated in like a chapter and a half. And my god, man, there are so many flashbacks. I can somewhat understand why they're there if they add to the context of what's currently going on, or if they reveal some kind of mystery. But after like the second time it happens, the flashbacks are kind of just there to be there. They break up tension more than it adds to it, and it kind of kills some of the mystery that made Shikama Doji and the past of Mika and you and the demons intriguing. We don't really learn many new things, at least not enough to justify how much we go back to these time periods. And overall, it makes the structure of the story become completely messy. But not only that, it introduces so many retcons in the story. And to be quite fair, retconning in itself isn't a bad thing. It's when damn near half of the story that took place beforehand is retcon that makes it bad. And that's what these later arcs do. They retcon pretty much everything. The entire flashback at the beginning of the series is retcon to be a planned out attack by Guren, who was in cahoots with the vampires the whole time, as a part of his master plan to save the entire world. Which doesn't make a lot of sense now, but whatever, I guess Guren is fucking Aizen now. Like, every event in a lot of Seraph of the End is some sort of master plan by either Guren or Mahiru or Ferret or Shikama Doji. Like, everything's part of some bigger plan. And it's not just the twist itself that's questionable, it's the reaction to it. Yu just up and forgives him because, oh, it's okay, you're my family too, and we're gonna bring everyone back anyways. Keep in mind, this guy pretty much committed a worldwide genocide, killed our main character's family, which by the way, almost resulted in Mika dying, then actually did kill Mika just to bring him back right after, killed Shiho's sister, and lied about pretty much everything to everyone, and manipulated everybody in the entire story up until this point, and is still manipulating them now. And it's just all okay that he did those things because they're just one big family and stick together to the end, and they're gonna bring everyone back to life, and so it's all okay now. This is written by a grown man, but it sounds like it's written by a 12-year-old. Like, this is just, it's just stupid, all right? It's just dumb. How forgiving everyone in the main cast is towards Guren is actually ridiculous. The guy commits literally the most evil and heinous crimes in the entire series, and gets forgiven for every single thing he does with justification for all of it. He's this big messiah figure who can do no wrong in the eyes of every character, despite him constantly taking the blame of it for good reasons. He manipulates everyone there, lies about everything, and ruins pretty much all of their lives, and they treat him like he's fucking Jesus. Now I understand he did lots of good for these characters as well, but that only adds on to my point that there needs to be some sort of nuance here. He has committed unforgivable actions that he shouldn't be so easily pardoned for. You could create so much more tension and complexity with your own cast if you made them lose trust in Guren for more than a fight and one chapter every time he backstabs somebody. He's done it more times than I can count on my own hands, which makes it even more ridiculous for the main cast to even believe a single word he says anymore and completely cooperate with him every time. Every character coddles him for being in the wrong despite him knowing he's in the wrong. They've had the exact same argument over whether or not everything that's happened is his fault, when every action he takes in the story only goes to prove that it is his fault because he's almost always the person who's pulling the trigger in all of these major events. He can be respected for what he's done, but having everyone still love and trust him after every jackass thing he has done only makes the characters look gullible and stupid and really makes you question how any of them even survived to this point. Every arc repeats so many plot points every time and somehow nothing has changed from the last time it occurred in the story. No one listens to Mika's warnings despite them having already come true every other time, and everyone gives Guren a pass despite being well over the line. It just doesn't make sense realistically or from a narrative perspective. The cast in general only gets worse as time goes on. Yoichi and Shiho are sidelined heavily. They mention their sisters every few chapters, then go back to being in the background without actually contributing anything to the plot. And Mitsuba, well, I don't even really need to talk about Mitsuba. I can't recall the last thing she had even contributed to the story, which is weird because every time a new arc starts, something is set up to give her some sort of character arc, and then nothing happens. Like, she actually doesn't even say anything sometimes. Narumi deadass just disappears from the story in general. One of the better developed characters in the cast literally just vanishes. Crowley goes from someone who was really intriguing with lots of potential to just being Ferret's follower in mischief. And worst of all, Shinoa's character becomes heavily butchered in recent chapters as well. There is no issue with her being a love interest to you, because we kinda all expected that to be the case, but that entire part of her character only makes her worse, and it completely contradicts everything she had done previously in the story, especially in the last few chapters. The way she acts isn't even like Shinoa. It starts off really well with her using her own mental and emotional strength both to save you and accept her feelings for him, but then it ends up going downhill when her feelings for him end up becoming the only thing left to her character. And it doesn't make it any better when you take into account that Yu just isn't a good protagonist. He's unironically one of the worst characters in his own series. There is an infinite amount of issues with Yuichiro's character, and I want to get one thing out of the way first. I know that he is supposed to be mentally unstable and traumatized, but these aren't valid excuses for over half of the reasons he is so unbearable to follow. His twisted view of Guren and the Shinoa squad doesn't make sense. He calls them his family just as much as he calls Mika his family, but yet he constantly throws them under the bus and puts them in danger. Mika went through just as bad, if not worse than you did, but he didn't turn out to be a complete irrational jackass. His tendencies of a literal murderer do not go well at all with his constant selfishness and naivety. At the core, Yu is a pretty awful person, but he's treated as if he's the exact opposite in the story. Everyone just loves him and thinks of him as a super nice guy despite how much he constantly says he doesn't give a shit about the world, doesn't give a shit about his own friends that were killed by his own quote-unquote family, and at any point would betray the same people he calls family just for Mika. Which those two don't even have a good dynamic either, because Mika knows that Yu is in the wrong, but he gets shut down immediately for literally being right every single time, and then just has to accept it and goes on to accept everything Yu does beyond that point. Mika is almost always in the right when he tries to talk some sense into everyone, but when they argue against him with the stupidest point possible, Mika's just like, oh okay, and acts as if he was given a new perspective when his perspective was the one that was true. Like literally, Mika is the only person in the series with a brain, and yet everyone shuts him down and treats him like he's the one in the wrong every single time he opens his mouth. He's the only one who sees the whole Guren thing as anything more than just a little black and white issue. It's just bad writing. There's no other way to explain it. The execution of otherwise interesting ideas is done absolutely terribly, and it's impossible to justify. Not every stupid and irrational decision that Yu makes can simply just be blamed on trauma. We're 120 chapters in, and he has only gotten worse. You can't even feel any sympathy for him anymore. Hell, you can't even feel any sympathy for any of these characters anymore. You can't really empathize with him either because there's no justification for how he acts. And worst of all, there's no way to even relate with him because his thought process makes no sense. It makes it even worse with this bring everyone back to life goal everyone has, because literally every terrible action a character commits in the story can be completely forgiven with no consequences, because at the end of the day, everyone's just going to be brought back to life soon anyways. At this point, I don't even want them to succeed in this anymore, because that would be the only way these characters would see any type of consequences for their actions. Because really, they don't deserve to be able to just bring everyone back and get away with everything they've done. I've gone on a very long tangent on Yuichiro, which sadly took up a lot more time than I expected it to, but overall, Seraph of the End suffers from something that a lot of people don't seem to really get when they talk about storytelling, which is that ideas are still only ideas while execution and portrayal is what matters the most in a story. Seraph of the End is a story with a lot of interesting concepts, a really cool power system and world, and otherwise intriguing characters that end up falling flat when actually written out. The author's able to make up very good designs and ideas for a character, but when it's time to actually give them character arcs and character development and to progress their characters further as the story goes on, it ends up becoming a lot worse. The world is underexplored, and the characters that end up receiving the most focus turn out to be the worst ones, while everyone else is given no room to develop or progress. The pacing and structure is extremely messy, and the themes and messages the story tries to convey can only be written off as extremely questionable. I will say that the current arc we are on right now in the manga has potential to bring the series at least somewhat back to the quality it used to be at. But with how some characters have been written lately, I wouldn't bet all my money on it. Even with how much this series has pissed me off, I'm still a fan and will be keeping up with the series. I'm disappointed with a lot of things, but some of these characters have just stick with me so much that I can't help but keep reading for them. I do hope it picks up more, and until it ends, I'll remain hopeful that some great event happens that somehow proves everything that I said wrong. I didn't make this video to try and hate on Seraph of the End because, as I said, I really liked this series. I really wanted to like the manga and everything that happened in it. And to be quite honest, for most of the series, it is pretty strong. It's just in the more recent 30 chapters that the series started to lose me and the writing truly became very questionable. There was still issues before that, but I could still pass it off. Right now, I can't pass it off anymore. They keep repeating everything, and it's just so messy right now. But with all that being said, that's really all I have to talk about in this video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.